Maria clutched her worn leather purse tighter as the subway car lurched forward, the familiar screech of metal against metal filling her ears. She glanced at her phone. 11:47 p.m. Another 16-hour day at the diner had finally ended, and she still had a 40-minute ride home to her small apartment where her 8-year-old daughter Emma was staying with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who never asked for payment but always accepted the occasional grocery bag Maria could afford to share. The subway car was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few late-night workers like herself and a man in an expensive navy suit sitting across the aisle. Maria tried not to stare, but it was hard not to notice the stark contrast between his polished appearance and her own food-stained uniform and sneakers with holes that she'd covered with duct tape. She wondered what it would be like to wear clothes that weren't from thrift stores, to not count every penny, to not fall asleep each night wondering if tomorrow would bring another financial crisis. As the train swayed through the tunnels, Maria's eyelids grew heavy. She'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, trying to save enough money for Emma's school supplies and the deposit on a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. The diner job barely covered rent and food, and the second job cleaning offices until late at night was taking its toll. She fought to keep her eyes open, knowing she still had to check on Emma and help her with homework if she was still awake. The rhythmic clacking of the train wheels became hypnotic, and despite her best efforts, Maria's head began to nod. She jerked awake twice, embarrassed, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. The third time, exhaustion won. Her body relaxed against the seat, and slowly, inevitably, her head tilted to the side. James Morrison had been having the worst week of his life. As CEO of Morrison Industries, a mid-sized tech company his father had built from nothing, he was facing a hostile takeover attempt that could destroy everything his family had worked for. The late-night emergency board meeting had gone poorly, with several members questioning his leadership and suggesting they consider the buyout offer. At 34, he felt the weight of 300 employee livelihoods on his shoulders, along with the legacy of his father, who had passed away just 2 years earlier. He'd loosened his tie and was reviewing financial projections on his tablet when he felt a gentle weight against his shoulder. The tired woman from across the aisle had somehow moved her, or perhaps he had, in his own exhaustion, and her head was now resting against his arm. His first instinct was to wake her, but something stopped him. She looked peaceful for the first time since he'd noticed her, and he could see the deep circles under her eyes, the way her work uniform hung loosely on her thin frame. James found himself studying her face, wondering about her story. There was something dignified about her even in sleep, a quiet strength that reminded him of his own mother, who had worked 3 jobs to support him and his sister after his father's first business had failed. He remembered being Emma's age, watching his mother fall asleep at the kitchen table over bills, her uniform smelling of the restaurant where she worked 16-hour days. For 20 minutes, James sat perfectly still, afraid to wake her. He watched the stations pass, noting that they were heading toward one of the city's most challenging neighborhoods. His tablet dimmed and went dark, the financial projections forgotten. Here was a woman who clearly knew what real struggle looked like, and somehow, her presence put his own problems into perspective. Yes, he might lose his company, but he had a trust fund, a penthouse apartment, and opportunities she could probably never imagine. When the train began to slow for Maria's station, James faced a dilemma. He could see from the window that it was a rough area, poorly lit, with several homeless individuals visible on the platform. The thought of this exhausted woman walking alone through those streets at midnight troubled him deeply. Gently, he touched her shoulder. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I think this might be your stop." Maria jerked awake, immediately realizing where she was and mortified by what had happened. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, pulling away and grabbing her purse. "I can't believe I'm so sorry. I haven't been sleeping well, and I didn't mean to. Please don't apologize, James said, standing as she did. You looked like you needed the rest. He paused, then made a decision that surprised even him. Would you mind if I walked with you? It's pretty late, and this neighborhood. Maria's pride flared. I can take care of myself. I've been doing it for 8 years. I'm sure you can, James replied. But my mother raised me to never let a lady walk alone at night if I could help it. Humor me? Something in his tone, respectful, not condescending, made Maria reconsider. She was tired, and it was a particularly dark night. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. As they walked through the dimly lit streets, they began to talk. Maria learned that James was nothing like the entitled rich man she'd assumed him to be. He spoke about his father with reverence, about the early days when the family had struggled, about the weight of responsibility he felt toward his employees. James, meanwhile, was struck by Maria's resilience and intelligence. She spoke about Emma with such love and pride, about her dreams of saving enough money to go back to school for nursing, about the small victories that kept her going. My daughter wants to be a scientist, Maria said as they walked. She's brilliant, straight A's despite everything. I just want to give her chances I never had. When they reached Maria's building, a rundown structure with a broken security door, James felt his heart clench. The contrast to his own living situation was stark and humbling. Thank you for the company, Maria said, extending her hand. I'm Maria, by the way. Maria Santos. James Morrison, he replied, shaking her hand. It was truly my pleasure, Maria. The next morning, James couldn't stop thinking about Maria. During his morning coffee, instead of immediately diving into crisis management, he found himself researching nursing programs and their costs, wondering about single mothers trying to advance their education. The interaction had affected him in a way he couldn't quite explain. 3 days later, James made an unexpected decision. He showed up at the diner where Maria worked, having tracked down the location through the name tag he'd glimpsed on her uniform. Maria was surprised and slightly embarrassed to see him in her workplace, but James was warm and genuine. I hope you don't mind, he said, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation. You mentioned wanting to go back to school for nursing. He placed an envelope on the table. My company has a community scholarship program that I think you should apply for. The application is in there, along with information about the program. Maria's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept charity, she said. It's not charity, James replied firmly. It's an investment. In someone I believe has the determination to succeed. The program exists to help people exactly like you, people who just need an opportunity. Over the following months, Maria did apply for and receive the scholarship. But more than that, she and James developed an unlikely friendship. He became a mentor figure to Emma, helping with science projects and occasionally taking both mother and daughter to museums and educational events. Maria, meanwhile, helped James remember what truly mattered, and not just profit margins and board meetings, but the real impact his company could have on people's lives. The hostile takeover attempt ultimately failed, partly because James had refocused the company's mission on community investment and employee welfare, making it less attractive to corporate traders but more valuable to stakeholders who cared about social responsibility. Maria graduated from nursing school with honors, with James and Emma cheering her on at the ceremony. 2 years after that late-night subway encounter, Maria was working as a registered nurse at a community health clinic, finally able to provide Emma with the stable life she'd always dreamed of giving her daughter. James had restructured his entire company around the principle that business success should lift up communities, not just shareholders. The moment that changed both their lives had lasted less than an hour on a subway car, but its effects rippled outward in ways neither could have imagined. Sometimes the most profound connections happen when we're too tired to maintain our usual defenses, when exhaustion strips away the barriers between strangers and reveals our shared humanity. Maria had simply needed rest. James had needed to remember why his work mattered. In finding each other in that moment of vulnerability, they had both discovered something invaluably: the power of human compassion to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Maria still took the subway to work, though now to the hospital instead of the diner. Sometimes she thought about that night and marveled at how a simple act of kindness, James allowing her to rest, then caring enough about her safety to walk her home, had changed everything. It reminded her that we never know whose life we might touch, or how our smallest gestures of humanity might create waves of positive change that extend far beyond what we can see.